Much better. And become enmeshed in the body and the soul of the sages of that generation. The sages of each generation, as we'll soon see in the parsha in a few weeks, it's called the eyes of the congregation. And these sparks of Moshe's soul empower the sages to teach Das to the people. So Das is really a quality of Moshe, but through the leaders in every generation that have sparks of Moshe in them, and they are called the eyes of the congregation, they teach this Das to the people, enabling the people to have Das of the greatness of God. And through this Das, they will be empowered to worship him with heart and soul. The influence you receive from Moshe's soul via the content. Do you guys say via or via? What do we say in America? Via, right?
I think either one.
Either one?
Either one.
Okay, fine. Via the contemporary sages is more powerful and tangible than the direct influence you receive from Moshe's soul. So again, we had one that was receiving it from Moshe's soul, who's considered a shepherd, and he nourishes us with it. But now he's saying a second way is to get it through the leaders that have a spark of Moshe in it. And now what the Alter Rebbe is making the argument for is that this way of getting it through the leaders of the generation, the spark of Moshe that is enmeshed in them, is a higher way, more powerful and tangible than the influence you could get directly from Moshe. And that is since in the contemporary sages, an actual spark of Moshe's soul is present, and B, the spark is embodied even in the physical presence of the contemporary sages, the body and soul of the sages. And like I've mentioned before, people, when they visited the Rebbe, who's obviously my go-to example of a leader of a generation, and the spark of Moshe found in them. By the way, another word, and Lynn, you could translate the word for us. There's a word in Hebrew called nasi. Do you know what to say, how to translate nasi? Or you're muted, so unmute yourself. Try, unmute yourself first.
Yes, so Nasi would be like a prince or a leader, or like someone who's even a president.
Exactly. So nowadays, the word for president in Hebrew, like there's a prime minister, which is called the Rosh Memshala, but then there's a president who has more of an honorary role, meaning they don't have such an active place in the Knesset and politics. They play more of an honorary role. They're called the Nasi. But originally, that's became the contemporary use of the word. But originally, Nasi actually meant prince. What did you say, Shira?
Different tribes.
Exactly. The different tribes each had a leader of their tribe, which we just learned about in last week's portion. Exactly, Shira. And each of them were called the Nasi, or Nasiim in the plural. Literally means a prince. But if you take, which is referring to the leaders of the generations. So, for example, one of the greatest leaders, his name was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince. He was simply known also as Rebbe. He's the author, the collector, the compiler of the Mishnah, and he was known as the Prince of that generation. So the reason why I'm keying into the word Prince so much is because the acronym of Nasi is brought in some of the good old books. The four letters of Nasi, Nun, Sin, Yud, Aleph, it stands for Nitzutzo Shel Yaakov Avinu, which means a spark of Jacob, our patriarch. That inside the Nasi, inside the prince, the leader, there's a spark of Jacob. And in other places, it explains why specifically it gives the word Jacob, the name Jacob, and not other leaders. But all that we'll leave for a different time. But what I want to bring back us here is that many people speak about their meeting with the Rebbe. And I remember even myself, and I think I've mentioned this before, people would say that when they saw the Rebbe, they didn't just see, when they saw the Rebbe's eyes, they didn't just see a great person. They saw the greatness within themselves. They saw almost a reflection of themselves, of how the potential that they have by meeting when they met the Rebbe, because that's really what a leader is. They're a leader. They guide you, they mentor you, they shepherd the flock. And therefore, even just the body and of course the soul of the sages, that physical presence already has a spark embodied in them of Moshe. This additional power of the contemporary sages to nourish your soul, your das, is stressed by the text of the Tanya here. Above, when discussing the direct influence of Moshe's soul, you were empowered simply to have das of God. But here, when speaking of the influence of Moshe's soul through the contemporary sages, the Tanya stresses that you will be empowered not only to have das of the greatness of God, but also to worship Him with heart and soul. Before it was having das of the greatness of God, the focus of the greatness of God. But now it's also saying that you'll be able to worship Him with your heart and soul, meaning it's something inside of you. The sages will empower you not only to acquire das, but also to translate it practically into devotional worship. And that's the key to everything, right? It's one thing to have a great das and appreciation and understanding of it, but it's an entirely other thing that it actually translates into practical devotion. And that's really what we're trying to learn here. And that's emphasized when we connect with the leaders that have a spark of Moshe in them. It makes it more tangible, that spark of Moshe inside of us. The Tanya reminds us why das is so crucial, and that's really where we're up to today. For the quality of your heart's worship is proportionate to your das. Again, so your heart worships based on the das that you have. As the verse states, and I'll translate it in Hebrew and then I'll say it in Hebrew and then translate it. Da et Elokei avicha ve'avdeu belev shalem v'nefesh chapetza. This is from Chronicles, which is Divrei Yamim. It says like this: know, or da, which is the idea over here of das, know the God of your father, and then you will be able, and again, that's in parentheses. It doesn't say that in the actual text, but it just follows the next words, and worship Him with a perfect heart and a yearning soul. So the Alter Rebbe is putting those two parts of the verse together, right? It's one verse, and the Alter Rebbe is saying is one leads into the other. When you have das, then you will be able to worship Him with a perfect heart. Again, the verse just says you shall know God and worship Him with a perfect heart. But over here, the Alter Rebbe is saying is one follows the next. When will you be able to worship Him with an authentic, perfect heart? When you have das. When you have das, then your worship is more authentic, is wholehearted. Faith alone without das doesn't compel you to worship God. The Talmud illustrates this with the example, I love this example, of a burglar, a thief, who has enters his tunnel, right? He goes through the fire escape, through let's say the chimney, to commit a burglary. What does he do? He prays to God that he won't be caught. So he has faith in God, but for the wrong reason. He's believing in God that he doesn't get caught. So he has emunah, but obviously this level of emunah is obviously a very, very shallow level. And that's the text of Ein Yaakov. So that's from the Talmud. It's a famous quote. But the burglar believes in God, but that doesn't stop him from violating God's commandment. Don't steal. He even prays to God for success in his burglary, asking God to help him violate God's will. So without das, you can easily slip into a state of cognitive dissonance where you're willing to perform an action that is contradictory to your belief. So that's a really awesome example where you can have emunah, which is faith in God, but if you don't have das to translate it practically and to personalize it, it could lead to bad stuff because it's coming from faith in God. Because I have faith in God, I'm going to end up trying to make sure I don't get caught in my theft. So das is what allows it to be grounded into something practical, that it doesn't contradict your belief. That's why we find that in Egypt, even after the people believed, or in Hebrew, the words are vayaminu b'Hashem, it was then necessary for the people to have das, that I am God. So let's just bring this out for a second. It says, Moshe came, he inspired the people. He actually said the key words. Does anyone know what the key words were that the Jewish people were waiting to hear from hundreds of years prior? Joseph dies, and before him, Jacob dies. And on their deathbed, they says the famous words, Pakod, Pakadati, God will surely remember you. So the Jewish people were waiting for a leader to come and use those words, the key words. God will remember you. So comes along Moshe and he says these words, and it says, the Jewish people knew this is the time. They believed by Aminu B'Hashem. They believed in God and in Moshe, a servant. But shortly after, a couple of chapters later, it says that they didn't listen. That it says that Moshe, just the background to the story, Moshe goes to Pharaoh and says, "Stop what you're doing to these people. Let them go." And Moshe says, "No." And Pharaoh says, "No," to the point where he says, "They're getting lazy. Make them increase and make their own bricks." And as a result, the Jewish people were fed up, and they said they didn't listen to Moshe anymore. They said, "Stop! You're driving us crazy." So what happened? At first, they said they believed in God, but then it didn't lead to any practical thing. They didn't actually go forward and say God's on our side, because the das that the emunah, the belief that they had, it wasn't grounded with das. So it wasn't a healthy level of emunah yet. Only later they needed to have das, and only once they had das was it able to be something that endures, something that makes it practical. So das enhances your emotions for God with consistency and integrity. Without das, you might love God 1 minute and then love something inappropriate a minute later. Wow. So you can have people that in prayer, they're the most devout. They're with their talis on, shuckling back and forth. But as soon as prayer is over, they're out in the streets doing who knows what, because it wasn't grounded with das. So at the time, they really believed in God, but a minute later, they believed in something else. So, it's some of the famous stories they say about the previous Rebbe when he was imprisoned. And actually, yesterday marks the 15th of Sivan, marks the day in 1927 when the Friedrich Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, was imprisoned and was actually sentenced to death for his obviously underground work of keeping Judaism alive behind the Iron Curtain in communist Russia. And when they brought him into interrogation, they were torturing him and they were trying to get information. And they showed him a gun and they said, "This gun makes even the most quiet person speak up." And the previous Rebbe responded, "This gun works only for a person who has one world and two gods, which means whatever it takes, I'll switch gods, but I want to keep my world because that's the only thing I know of. But for a person who has two worlds and one God, this gun doesn't make any difference to, meaning it doesn't intimidate me." Or, the person Yankel. So anyway, the point of what I'm trying to say from that is your faith in God needs to be grounded with das. It has to be grounded with something that you actually have tangible. And the point over here is that the Moshe is the one that nourishes that das, and it comes through the leaders of that generation that may help make it practical. Or the community, the congregation thief. He was the pickpocketer of everyone, and he comes to the rabbi shortly after the reading of the 10 Commandments in synagogue, where it says "Don't steal," and he goes to him and he says, "Rabbi, I want to confess all the times I've done this. I want to repent. I want to make good. I want to come back." And the rabbi was so happy. He was extremely thrilled that now Yankel is going to come back from his evil ways. All right, so time to do teshuvah. And he starts praying. And then the rabbi goes home and he realizes his pocket watch is missing. And he's like, Yankel, he goes back to Yankel. He says, "Did you take my watch?" And Yankel says, "Listen, Rabbi, I want to be a good Jew, but business is business." So he's still, doing his thing on the side. So he has emunah, but it's not grounded with with das. It's not making it. So anyway, point is, das is what makes it consistent, makes my worship of God consistent and with integrity, and it makes it come into my emotions. Without das, you might love God 1 minute and love something inappropriate a minute later. I find that to be powerful. But only in the future era will we have sufficient das of our own that we will no longer require the influence of the sages. As the verse states, no longer will they need to teach one another, saying, "Know," or "Da," God, for all of them will know me. So what this means from Jeremiah, from Yirmiyahu, is that rabbis will be out of jobs, There won't be a need for leaders anymore, because the das of God will be something that we all have. And therefore, you won't need leaders anymore to feed it to you. You won't need leaders anymore to inspire you in your das. Because nowadays, we need that influence and that guidance to keep our das in check, and therefore to keep our emotions in check and to make it consistent. But when Mashiach comes, it says on that day, it's a prophecy, we will no longer need to teach, because we will all know God, which I find to be powerful. Until that time, however, we are all dependent on the sages of our generation. Whoops, there you go. We were all dependent on the sages of our generation to nourish our powers of das in order to worship God properly. So that's awesome. Let's see section 2, how to meditate your way to das. Merely learning from the sages of the generation will not be enough. You will have to make a sustained effort in your meditative work if you want to require real das. So this is a beautiful message, and we're going to see it soon, but I just want to already bring out one really awesome point, and that is from the first address the Rebbe gave as Rebbe, which was in January of 1951. It's known as Yud Shvat, the 10th day of the Hebrew month of Shvat, where the Rebbe, on the first yahrzeit of the previous Rebbe, became the Rebbe. He delivered an address as what's known in Hebrew as a mimer, a Hasidic discourse that is designated only for Rebbes to share. And on that evening, the Rebbe said like this: don't think that now that you have a Rebbe, you could rely on me and you could sit back and relax. Nope. We are not Polish Hasidim, the Rebbe says. We're not from Poland, there's obviously different Hasidic sects, but in the Polish sects of Hasidism, they rely a lot on their Rebbe to do all the work for them. The Rebbe says, no, it's going to require immense effort from you. I am here to help, but the work will be required from each of you. I find that to be a very powerful line. And just parenthetical, that was in 1951 when the Rebbe ascended to the mantle of leadership of Chabad. After the Rebbe passed, 1994, on the 3rd of Tammuz, whose yahrzeit that date is coming up in just 3 weeks, or less, 2.5 weeks or something, the Rebbe said these following words. The broadcasters on TV stations were saying or predicting the end of Chabad, because we rely so much on our Rebbe, because they looked at Chabad like any other sect that rely on the Rebbe, that without a Rebbe, the group, the Chabad will collapse. But the Rebbe set it up already from before, that don't think, as long as you have a Rebbe that's here to guide you every day, that you're it's a walk in the park, that it's a piece of cake. No, the Rebbe is there to guide you, but the work is expected of you yourself, to pound the pavement and to make a difference in the world. And we see that so clearly of what happened after Gimel Tammuz, where we didn't fall apart, we didn't collapse as a group. We expanded it to even greater imagination than no one even expected. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this section 2 of chapter 42, this idea that don't think that the leader is the spark of Moses, and as long as you see the leader, you're in good shape. No, that's part of it. But then you also have to do the work and meditation on your own to integrate that das, that cognition, that recognition and focus into our psyche. Okay, let's see it inside. Second paragraph, third paragraph from the top. But the principal quality of das, if you're looking in the book, it's on 529. The principal quality of das isn't mere factual knowledge, as the term das superficially implies. Das is often translated simply as knowledge, which we've been using that term in general. That term is often used in the world to explain das. But over here, that doesn't mean das. Knowledge is not the accurate translation, because it's not about factual knowledge. It isn't just that people should have factual knowledge of God's greatness from teachers and from books. Rather, the main point is to feel the truth of these teachings by personally connecting with the ideas. Your feeling for something depends on the depth with which your mind recognizes it and connects with it. The key to a successful das meditation doesn't depend on which particular thoughts you have about God What matters is the intensity of those thoughts. And as I like to share, you could study and study, but that isn't the foundation of what Judaism will remain in your heart with. You could study and read and study some more, but only when you close the book and then think about it and then apply it and make it practical, make it personalized, make it yours, only then do you really own Judaism. Because as long as you're studying in a book, of course, that's important. You have to toil in Torah, study and read. And like the Pirkei Avot, ethics of the father says, in Aramaic, the term is hafachba, maybe it's Hebrew, hafachba v'hafachba dekulaba. Turn it over, because all of it is in it. Everything is in the Torah. But at the same time, realize that if you really want to have ownership over it, it's not enough to just study it. You have to personalize it. That's what Das is. Like I've mentioned before, that in yeshiva, we study for an hour and a half in the morning from 7:30 to 9. We begin our studies. But then for prayer, there's a half an hour gap before we actually pray with a minyan. In yeshiva, we have the luxury of being able to pray later because we're not running off to work, and therefore minyan is not at 6:30 in the morning. We could study first for an hour and a half and then pray. But before prayer, there's a preparation time of half an hour when the books are closed, and it's more of a quiet time where you actually just focus. What did I study? What does that mean to me? How do I apply that in my worship, in my service? And that's what we pray with. And then we open the Siddur and then we pray. The idea is to personalize the idea. So it's not just the knowledge, which is what we do when you study, but Das is actually bringing it to you, making it yours, personalizing it. And that's what makes it enhances your emotions, because then that develops your feelings towards something when you think about it. So it's not just the study of it, but it's actually personalizing. I know I've been repeating these ideas over and over, but when you get what Das is, you're in good shape. Okay. So what matters is the intensity of those thoughts, the bottom paragraph of the Kindle page now. And the intensity of those thoughts is dictated based on the Das that you have towards it. The key to Das is through pondering deeply with your Das on God's greatness and fixating your thoughts on God with an intensity of mind and determination of heart, until a firm and strong attachment is achieved between your thoughts and God. Literally meditating and making your heart fixed on God. Let's see that in the translation over here. Das is achieved through an intense fixation and attachment of the mind on thought about God, to the point where you are drawn to him and his worship. So there's God, and you are thinking about God, and that draws you in. In fact, this is suggested by the biblical use of the term das, which can sometimes refer to desire or will. So das is used in a term for desire. When you desire something and you think about it, because you desire it, you want it, that's how you develop an attachment towards it. And he quotes a verse from Amos, which says, "From all the families of the earth, I have desired Yadati, you alone." The implication here is that when you deeply recognize something's value, you will come to desire it. So one is the facts. So let's say if I desire something, how do you develop a desire for it? You read about it. When you want something, you learn more about it. And the more you learn about it, the more you want it, the more you desire it, the more you're attached to it. But how does that attachment come? By knowing it, by learning about it. So the same thing is also with Hashem. How will that das, that desire, be developed? By thinking about it, by meditating on it. When you meditate about God, it will develop this desire to be close to God. That's what das is. But how do you calibrate das? How do you know when you've achieved it? And that is as follows. Das will connect you with an idea, just like you're connected with a physical object that you see with your physical eyes. Let's read that again. Das will connect you with an idea, just like you are connected with the physical object that you see with your physical eyes and which you're thinking about deeply. If you meditate effectively, Das has the potential to make spiritual ideas real to you, as if you have seen them with your physical eyes. It won't be that you've heard about God or that someone told you he exists. Through Das, you will come to appreciate God as a living reality. Okay, so let's just pause here for a second. If you remember that example we quoted from the Talmud before about the thief, the burglar who's about to do his job, about to do his thievery, and he prays to God that he be successful. Obviously, what he's missing is Das. For him, the idea of God is just, some spiritual idea, but it's not really real to him. In order to make something, in order for God to be real in your life, that's where Das comes in. Das has the ability to take something of spiritual godliness, like God, and able to make it something real to you, something that you could see with your own eyes. That's what Das has the ability to do. That God is as real to you as the piece of cheesecake that you want in front of you. That's what God is to you. It says real. It's real to you. So godliness can remain as a belief system. I believe in God. Or godliness through this power of Das becomes so real to you that it's part of your everyday. You see it as you would see physical ideas, physical matter. That's what Das, it allows you to appreciate God as a living reality. Wow, this is amazing stuff. And this is the quote of a verse that I mentioned last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, and he's about to quote it now. And we know that the term Das suggests intimate connection, as in Adam knew, or in Hebrew, Yada, from the word Das, Eve. The next line of that verse, and she gave birth to a child. So what happened before the child was born was Das. Over here, we're translating Das from this verse as an intimate connection. They were close to each other, and a child was born. So Das is making something real to you, like a physical idea. And then when you have Das, you'll appreciate godliness as you will to any other physical object that you could see with your eyes. Any questions before we go further? Yeah, okay. In addition to knowledge and desire, so till now we're saying that Das is knowledge, knowing God, but it's a lot more. It's an intimate connection with God. It's the meditation. When you fix your mind on God, you will develop a desire for it, just like anything else. The more you think about something and research it, the more you are developing a desire for it. So if you meditate on God, which is what Das is about, you will develop a deep emotional attachment to God, an intense love for God. Just like Adam and Eve, when he intimately knew her, when Adam intimately knew Eve, it gave birth to a child. So to give birth to an emotion and for it to be real to you of God, it comes through this idea of Das, which is an intimate connection, deeply knowing God, this desire that we have for God. In addition to knowledge and desire, Das also implies intimate connection, and this is acquired in 3 phases. And that is, we're on 530 in the middle. So there's 3 phases in this connection that we are developing. Number 1 is, in Hebrew, the word is hiskashrus, which is personally connecting to an idea so that you feel its relevance to your life. In modern Hebrew, it's called hitkashrut, but with the Ashkenazic accent, it's hiskashrus, which is personally connecting to an idea so you feel its relevance in your life. Number 2 is hakara, which is deeply recognizing the real impact of an idea on your life. And we're going to go through all these things in a moment. And then number 3 would be hargasha, the shift from an intellectual recognition of an idea to an actual feeling of it. So let's just review these 3 things. Number 1 is personally connecting. Whoops. Number 2 is recognizing. Number 3 is feeling it. You connect to idea, you then recognize it, and then you could feel it. And I think all this is included in das, which is this intimate connection. Yeah, let's try to see that again. Steve, speak up. Let me hear.
Does this process of das apply not only to God, but anything that we attach our interests or our focus on? Like, for example, often like in therapy, we focus on our pain or on our trauma or on the negative things that have happened to us. Do we become das to that as well? And we become merged with our thoughts, even if our thoughts are not about God, but about our pain and what misery our life is about or anything of that nature?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If a person is all into Hollywood and the actors and movies, that's what is like. That's what, if in Yiddish, there's a term, Steve, I don't know if you've heard of this term. It's called a kach. What are you into? If you're into God, your whole motivation in life is going to revolve around God. If you're into movies, the way you see things will be through the lens of a movie. Oh, I just watched this. I just saw this. Oh, it reminds me of that scene. But when you're into God, everything around you is taken with that lens. The difference, I would say, so the simple answer, Steve, is yes. Das is, what are you connecting with? Obviously, over here in Tanya, we're talking about our relationship with Hashem and developing our emotions of love and awe and reverence. To do that, you need that key of das to take what you're thinking about God to make it practiced in your emotions. But just one step further, Steve, what I want to say is that unlike in other things, the das that we're referring to here could be nurtured with Moshe, right? Moshe is the quality of das. So when you connect with the leaders of the generation, you're connecting with the das that you could have nurtured or nourished in you with das that we have from Moshe. But that part of the Moshe aspect, which is what this whole chapter is themed around, what Moshe feeds us, that's only the das in kedusha and holiness. But of course, in every chachma, bina and das is obviously godly qualities that he gave us, right? God, and just to go back to chapter 3, God created the world with his chachma, bina, and das. God, it's called in Hebrew the sefirot. Actually, just parenthetical, Adina's younger sister just gave birth to a baby girl a couple of days ago, last week, and you wouldn't believe what her name is. It's a very unique name. They named her Sephira Kaylee. I've never heard the name before. Sephira because of the lights of God, and Kaylee literally means a vessel. That we should be the vessel to have God's Sephira, like we call Sephira to Omer, right? The counting of the Omer is because of God's powers, the soul powers that we have that are reflected in how God created the world. But anyway, the point is, Chachma, Bina, Das, and then the 7 emotional attributes are the way God made our ways of thinking. But the opening chapters of Tanya are really what we call the lexicon. It says, just like we have Chachma, Bina, and Das, and the 7 emotional attributes in Kedusha, in holy matters, we also have those 3 cognitive and 7 emotional attributes in the Yetzer Hara, in the animal soul. Also it has it. The godly soul has it, and the animal soul has it. And it also tries to use its soul, Chachma, Bina, Das, of the animal soul, to try to get us to like an idea that we shouldn't be, to try to get us to act on an emotion that we shouldn't. And that's the whole fight between the 2 sides. So of course, Das exists in everything, and Chachma, because it's part of our soul, but it's what we're using it for. And over here, obviously the goal, the idea of this intimate connection should be with our das of Kedusha. Make sense, Steve? Yes, Robin.
So we can have DOS for klipa, something that's klipa.
Yeah. Yeah. A person could be all into klipa, desiring it nonstop and getting excited of the idea. But how are they? How is it being translated into something that they're ferocious about, that they can't let up, and that everything around them is focused around it, everything they see is around this concept that's in their mind, because that's what they're into. That's where they're meditating. That's what they're always thinking about. So over here, the intimate connection that we're trying to build on is on the kedusha, the das of God, and know that's the word. Dat Elokei Avicha, know God, and then you could worship Him with a whole heart, with a complete heart. But yeah, it exists in other things as well, and that's why what are you into? That's you could be into sports, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Like the Warriors are in the finals, it's very important, but at the same time, it's not what defines who I am. And for some people it is. But we want our definition of self to be our soul, not the cheesecake, not the home I live in, and not the car I drive. That's not who I am. Because then if there's a scratch on your car, your whole existence is in question. Because you didn't just hurt my car, you hurt me. Because that's what you're into. But in the contrast, when a person offends God, it offends me. And therefore, I'm going to stand up for it. Because that's what I'm into. That's what Das is. What are you into? What are you fixated on? And chapter 42 is saying that we have, by our very nature, the ability to have this Das of God inside of us. That's what we're into. And we're developing it over here. And it's a beautiful idea, just going through it. That through our meditation, it builds this das, right? Because das is that segue or that bridge between our mind and our heart, between the idea that we know and the feeling that we have, the feeling of it, that we are pulled towards it or run away from it. But that's das, meaning das is the intensity. So again, maybe that's another good word for das. Das is our intensity towards something. Will I love it or hate it? How intensely will I? It's dependent on how much das I have towards it. How much did I think about it? How much am I personally attached to it? That will make my love or hatred or compassion and empathy towards something or against something more or less. It's all in das. And das is from Moshe. He's the shepherd of das inside of us. Awesome. Well said. Thank you all for your input. It really adds a lot. Okay, so now, Steve, is your hand still up, or is that just from before? If there's anything else, let me know.
I'll get it down.
Okay, good. And you know what? I think I could also bring it down. Let me see. Lower hand. I did it for you. Cool, Steve. Okay, awesome. And the potential to acquire this attribute of das through meditative work to connect your das with God. We're on the second paragraph of the Kindle. And I think towards the bottom of 530. All right, so now how do we acquire it? That allows us to connect with God is within the ability of every soul in the house of Israel. We could all do it by virtue of the energy which is drawn from the soul of Moshe, our teacher of blessed memory. We have the ability, don't think it's only for the greats and the elitists that are studying Torah all day that could be fixated on it and have the das. Every single Jew has it by inheritance from Moshe, by virtue of the energy which is drawn from Moshe. Being connected to Moshe's soul doesn't mean that you will have das of God automatically or effortlessly. It just means that if you put your mind to it and meditate with focus, you have the potential to succeed. Meaning you are guaranteed success if you put the work in, because we already have the DNA from Moshe to have das. We just have to uncover it, but it's there already. It requires effort. But once you put the effort in, you will be able to uncover it. The potential is there. only despite this inherent potential of your soul connection with Moshe's soul, since your soul is placed into your body, an enormously great and intense effort is required, doubled and redoubled to tap into that potential. So it's in there, but it requires, and this is a really strong expression by the Alter Rebbe, a double, enormously great and doubled and redoubled. That's a lot. It's a lot of levels to be able to tap into it. And just before we continue, the reason why I'm being so careful on the words and analyzing the doubled, redoubled, enormously great and intense effort that it requires is because it says that the Alter Rebbe spent an incredible amount of time on every single letter of writing the Tanya, to the point where there's a story that I don't know if it was one of the children of the Alter Rebbe that came in, and the Alter Rebbe was working on a letter of a word. It's the letter Vav of the word vechulu, which means and, etc. Should there be and or not? Should the letter Vav be in there or not? And the story has it that a month later, the child came in and the Alter Rebbe was still stuck on that question. Should the letter Vav be in there or not? So you could see just how meticulous the Alter Rebbe was in writing every letter of the Tanya that he put into his writing. And therefore, when the Alter Rebbe says that we have the ability, but we just requires effort, the term the Alter Rebbe uses here is enormously great and intense effort. And it requires doubled and redoubled. So that's 4 levels, double and redouble, to tap into that potential. So I think that's going to be what we're going to be analyzing. He brings a source for the next few paragraphs that he's going to translate in the author's translation. He says it's from Rabbi Alexander Yudasin from Alekach Vehalibuv, which is I guess a commentary on the Tanya. But I've never heard of this book. But let's see what he says. These next few paragraphs is a commentary of the Tanya by this person that's bringing it in. An enormously great, and again, this is a quote that we just said in the previous line, and number 2, intense effort, and then number 3 is doubled, and number 4, redoubled, suggests 4 distinct elements in your efforts to achieve das. So there's the way to achieve das, in your efforts to achieve das, it requires 4 of these elements. What are them? Enormously great, which was again the quote, effort, indicates that a large quantity of time needs to be dedicated to this meditative work. So it's not enough just a little bit, it requires a lot of time. Intense effort suggests that the meditation must be of high quality and great depth. The work is doubled in that it involves both the body and the soul. And when the Alter Rebbe says that it is redoubled, since in both areas, body and soul, 2 types of efforts are required, as the Tanya will now clarify. And he didn't yet mention it, but one is an effort of the body and an effort of the soul. But I think, but let's just pause there for a second. So when the Alter Rebbe says that to have das in you, it requires an intense effort. It requires a great effort, I think was the first line. Enormously great effort. And then intense effort, and doubled and redoubled, he's referring to 4 parts. One is an effort of quantity. Another is an effort of quality, the depth of our effort in our meditation of das. And then it's doubled because it's the body and the soul that have to be involved in it. It can't just be a soul effort, but our body is not up for the work. And number 4, it has to be redoubled because it's going to require 2 types of effort, as we're about to say. So that's just a commentary of this rabbi on the Alter Rebbe's choice of the words. Okay. Oh, yes, Robin.
The idea that we're learning that about the sparks of Moshe's soul and how they help us achieve das, is that idea original with the Alter Rebbe, or was that or is that something that he's expounding upon from someone else?
That's a very good question. My simple answer is it's
Whoops, sorry.
no problem. That's a very, very good question. And the answer is no, it's not the Alter Rebbe's novel idea. Like many things in Chassidus, most of Chassidus is not novel. It's just uncovering sources that were there and emphasizing them and showing you. So this is actually from 2,100 years ago from the Zohar, the Holy Zohar, which obviously a lot of Tanya is based on. If you go back to 527, he actually quotes these words from the Zohar. I'll just read it out because I'm not going to make you go all the way back, but it says like this. This is a quote from the Zohar. In every single generation, there are sparks from Moshe's soul that come down and become enmeshed in both the body and the soul of the sages of that generation. And he puts in parentheses, that's from Tikkunei Zohar, page 112a. And then he quotes from the sages, he quotes from the book of Numbers of Torah, that's going to be this parsha that we read, that the sages of each generation are called the eyes of the congregation. And they teach the das. Yeah, because in Tanakh, in the Ecclesiastes from Solomon, he says the job of the leader is to teach. Doesn't say just to teach the people; it's to teach das to the people. So again, those are three different sources where you see so clearly that das is the role of the leaders of the generation to teach, and they get that das from Moshe.
Oh, so that really makes some other things fall into place. So Moshe was indeed the leader of that generation, because I've been wondering why aren't we talking about the sparks from Aaron? But Aaron was not a leader. Aaron was the priest, the high priest, who let's see, he didn't lead. What did he do? He wasn't a leader as such. He was a he I don't know. I'm looking for an idea.
Yeah, it's a good question. The simple answer would be he represented, as a Kohen Gadol did. He represented the Jews. But just to quote from last week's Torah portion, the main thing, and I wrote about this extensively in my weekly email, the job of the Kohen is to bless.
That's it, right?
Blessing.
Bless. I read that. I read what you wrote. Yeah.
So it's another good term for what a Kohen does. But also, just interesting, the Kohen, the Kohanic, I don't know if that's the right word, the Kohanic tribe, their main job is to be people of kindness, people of love. And Aaron is famous for bringing peace in homes and for bringing harmony in relationships and in friendships. That's what Aaron was famous for. And there's different stories of that that I'm not going to mention now. But each Aaron, to his own degree, was a leader. I would say he wasn't the leader of the Jews, but there was things that only Aaron was able to do that Moshe had to rely on him. And Moshe obviously had, even wanted Aaron to be the leader, right? The story of the burning bush. But obviously Moshe was the one that shepherds the faith, shepherds das of God, that therefore the faith comes from there. And I'm not going to get into that because that's another, maybe I will, just because back on page 525, we did say that Moshe was a shepherd of faith. He called him the Raya Mehemna. And again, that's from the Jerusalem Talmud. It says he was the faithful shepherd. That's actually also from the Zohar, if I'm looking at that source properly. He was the faithful shepherd, but the way we understood that in the Zohar is that he was the shepherd of faith. It wasn't just that he was a faithful shepherd, that he was always standing by our side, but he was also the shepherd of faith. But together with that, he shepherded das, because what we're learning now is the real faith, to make it consistent and to make it authentic, is when you have das. If you want your faith in God to be healthy, you have to really know God, to be personal and meditate on God. So I guess what I'm trying to say, let me just phrase this in other words. Faith and das go hand in hand. If a person says, I have full faith in God, but I don't care what he asks me to do, it's not real faith. Like a burglar standing on the threshold of his home, of the home that he's about to steal from, he believes in God and therefore he's praying to him, but it's such a shallow level of faith. He's believing in God up to the point where it benefits me. Knowing God, which is what Moshe did, it brings real faith of God to us, because it makes us wholehearted in our in our service of God. That's what real faith is. Faith is real when it brings into practice. How is the faith going to translate into practice? Through true deep recognition of what it is. And that's the faith of God. What it is in our das. When you meditate on it, which is what Moshe gives us the ability to do, then it becomes consistent. It becomes deep and authentic, and it becomes intense. All the fancy words that we've been using, and I guess we'll be ending the class in a moment. So with that, I will actually read just the practical lesson. I always like to try to end with something practical.
Right, so the faith that the burglar shows is really kind of the shallow faith in magic, you know?
Well, I mean, to some degree, he actually he believes in God, but it's such a shallow level of belief. Right? He does believe in God, and therefore he's praying to God and not to, I don't know who else. But it's only to the point where it benefits he's hoping that he's going to be successful. So let's see the practice. Oh, yeah, sure.
Did you say the animal soul then is actually leading the burglar? It's not truly divine. It's the animal.
For sure, it's the animal soul.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. Because it's his desire for, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, practical lesson. You can't just rely on the sages or on your soul's energies to acquire das. This is a very powerful idea. Don't rely on the leader to do the job for you. You need to do some serious meditative work. How serious? Intense. What was the term? Enormous effort, redoubled, doubled, all these words that we've been using. Das is acquired through intense focus on an idea about God so that your mind becomes fixated and attached to it. And you could see this, in everything that happens. I'll just, on a very personal note, the idea where things, you could look at the same thing and say, it worked out so perfectly, or it was a disaster. Just on a very personal note, and I told Shira, I was telling Thomas, I guess he updated you, and I don't know how many of you I told, and I guess this part I don't have to put